Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar Wednesday. I'm Ria Stark from TLC, and we're so glad that you're able to join us this afternoon. I don't know about you all, but it is starting to feel like summer for me. Mid-May is when it starts to heat up, and I'm sure our school libraries are counting down days till their vacation. But before you check out, these last couple of weeks of the school year are the best time to start preparing your stories to get those to the right people. And we're going to show you how to do that today with our friends from EveryLibrary. So, a couple housekeeping things before we get started. We are recording. There's going to be a ton of great content. So, if you miss something or if you want to rewatch it or share it with your colleagues, please do so. The recording will be available tomorrow and you'll get an email reminder to let you know. And in the meantime, if you have any questions during this presentation, please ask those in the questions panel, and we will get to as many of those as possible at the end of the session. So please stay tuned for that. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming John Kraska from EveryLibrary to give us some great tips and tricks. John, thanks for joining us.
Maria, it's always a pleasure to be here with the TLC community. Thank you for this invitation today and the chance to hang out with some of the school librarians in particular. Folks, the subtitle here is Turning This Year's Work into Next Year's Support. Our hope with this whole project is to be able to help you move forward, asks for funding, asks for new authority, asks for things like new collections and even new colleagues. What we've got here at Every Library is some assets to share. We work a lot on school library issues. In addition to our public library and academic library portfolios, we do that across two different components of our work. One is our 501c4 uh, political action committee. Technically, it's a dark money super PAC for libraries. And we do all of our work over there on library funding or the structure of government or the right to read pro bono and for free. We do that work with school libraries on the um, on the SaveSchoolLibrarians.org platform with folks who are facing job problems, crises around right to read in their schools, and also to the public library and school and academic library side. We have our C3 side, which is our research institute. It's public policy, tax policy, and education policy for libraries. How do we work to structure government properly? How do we have ed policy that is comprehensive and student forward with a library and a librarian involved? That kind of work around research and surveys. Put all this together. I've got some stuff to share with you about how to build awareness about your school library program, build power for yourself and your colleagues who are school librarians, and move a funding conversation forward over time with your district or with your local school. The there's some challenges to the way that we've been doing school library advocacy in general, and I want to confront some of those challenges, but also turn our perspective on advocacy about a quarter turn. We tend to do advocacy and activism the same way, and we tend to put the two of those things together, where we are trying to get loud for libraries and co-create a framework for the future of school library programs and school librarianship, where it's inside of an education policy framework and there's a funding formula for education and there's a funding allocation at the school district level, and yet we want to also get loud for libraries. That doesn't work. What we want to pull apart today for you is the idea that advocacy is fundamentally about co-creation of a policy and a budgetary framework. And activism is about either seizing opportunity or averting crisis. We're going to focus more on advocacy because with this session today, we're going to focus more on advocacy because there's an approach to doing co-creation that starts with identification of resources that you would like to see brought to your program, to your staffing, to your collections, to your services. But it starts fundamentally with an education and an orientation to who you are and what you do. Activism is more like we're going to need to wear some t-shirts that say don't ban the books. Different modes. Let's proceed. The challenges to advocacy, though, that co-creation of a budgetary and policy framework in K-12 that we have to confront and work on overcoming, and thanks for being part of this with the TLC community today, to do that overcoming, there's a low-level support for school library funding among administrators, and we have to be able to address that head on. And this technique of using the year end and the beginning of next academic year as well as an approach to addressing that requires us, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, to be argumentative. Now, we have to make the right argument. We have to have a studied argument about why it's us and not somebody else. Why our program and not another coach, another learning center, another literacy or lab of some sort. Folks, the work that we're going to do here today is to target this fact that there's a low level of support and how we start to change it. A low level of understanding also among stakeholders about your role in student outcomes. And fundamentally, I want to unpack that today because there is a lot of dot connecting that you have to do. My apologies for the work I'm about to give you. There's a lot of dot connecting that you have to do because they have not connected the dots themselves between what you do and what the student outcomes are. What the student outcomes are that they all agree should be part of what we're doing in education every day. They're never going to do it spontaneously. This is how we help engineer that dot connecting. Yes, there are places where you've got great allies, but in many places you don't. The school librarian is alone sometimes, and I want to help obviate that aloneness, both for the collegiality as well as for the we're all in this budget fight together. And we have to be aware within our own profession about the fact that we're not necessarily interested in being political. I get it. I'm not asking you to be a politician. I'm asking you to understand that the funding that comes, especially in public schools, from the taxpayers, and the funding that comes from tuition and foundation and bequests on private schools and wherever your charter mix is coming from, if you're in the charter space, that money is inherently political. And let's get you over that hump today. There are four meta conditions in education. I just want to make sure that we're all level set on this because the environment that all of your good advocacy work is going to hits within this meta condition. Per pupil, per student expenditures on materials is uneven around the country, let alone within districts or states. Certified or licensed school librarians continue to be cut around the country. I want to get ahead of that with you. State aid to schools is uneven, and it's going to get worse because the U.S. Department of Education is being unwound and the funding formulas are being significantly disrupted. In fact, there's billions of dollars currently being held up in Washington, D.C. by the Trump administration, and I'm not being partisan here. It's a fact the Trump administration is holding back a lot of funding now during 2026 that has already been appropriated by Congress, but has not been apportioned yet. However, as money does move, the states are more important now than the federal government, and it will be for several years to come in terms of how they spend the money, the rules that are made to spend money that comes from the feds, and therefore the supports that come from the state. I'd like to suggest that this learning locally that we're doing today about your own district or your own school, how to use this end of the year time to report, will give you some leverage at the state level. The more we do it at the local level, the better we get at it. The background radiation that your end of the year work is landing in, the background radiation that just goes on, how Americans are wired, whether we're talking about your zip code or my zip code, your school district or my school district, the way that the Americans are wired to think about education matters. This is from PDK, Phi Delta Kappa. They've been doing polls of the American public about their perception of education. Once in a while, they'll ask a school library question as well. But their perception of education on the part of the American public since 1953. And the longitudinal data that they've got is incredible. If you like data, go visit PDK. But 2004 to 2025, Americans rate their local school very, very, very much higher than they rate education overall nationally. And in fact, the delta between them has gotten worse in the last 20 years, where we're given our local schools an A or a B. We love you because you're our teachers. You're our school librarians. You're our local principal. You're even our local administration. But nationally, education overall is in the pits. This is a good thing for your local school level conversations. There is a disposition that people have to forgive some of the flaws and to lean into the successes. And folks are desperately interested in hearing how schools have been more successful for their kids in particular since COVID specifically, and today, like it used to be for them when they were of age themselves. This local versus national is important because we don't want to necessarily put one arm behind our backs by the national perceptions around education. This is a local conversation about local taxes and local funding for the community-based school that you're part of. I do want to share with you how parents think about education overall and question as we move through this conversation today a little bit of the vocabulary that we use about school library programs in relation to how people are thinking about the school that they love, that local school. It is interesting to me that the way that Americans are practically interested in outcomes for education, and they're driven by the news in a lot of ways as well, that this matrix of what is most important to the parents, and this is overall nationally according to PDK, and the emphasis that we potentially put on things from the school library side, or we don't even talk about them because it's not necessarily in our remit. This is advice giving that's driven by data. It's a wellspring to go back to, and to remember that there are places that are resonant and there are places that are not resonant with parents in the reporting that we want to do about our impacts and potentially outcomes at the end of the year. PDK, Phi Delta Kappa, also talks a lot about salaries and the cost of education. And if we're to have a conversation about your worth, it's of course about what you've done for your students. It's about how you've collaborated with other teachers. It's about how you've helped the school administration succeed. But fundamentally, your worth is also your paycheck. And I want you to know that I'm very interested, and I want to show two samples here at the national level and on the state level, the differences between those two things. This is just one recent pullout from our friends in Connecticut, that you can talk about your money. People, it's on their minds. We have a tendency in library advocacy trainings to say, don't talk about your money, don't talk about your salary, don't talk about what you're worth. Folks are interested in hearing what the value is, and because it's a way that their value system about education is expressed. Did we hire the right people? Do we have the right people in place? And yes, it does cost some money, but once in a while it's spent smartly. There is an important intersection point, and we're going to get to more messaging in a little bit. There's an important intersection point because there's a trust and confidence gap that does exist between what the public thinks about things like media literacy, information literacy, those core components of librarianship, and um, the gap between how they really truly feel it's being done in the schools. How much trust and confidence do you have in your community's public school teachers around media literacy and being informed consumers of news and information? I want to share this with you because not every story needs to lead with the librarian's vocabulary or the librarian's key deliverables. The key deliverable here is that there's less confidence in public school teachers, and you're part of that matrix, than there should be. Um, and that there's so much disruption socially and politically around the country right now that we need to be sensitive to the fact that some of the stories that we want to tell might not land properly at this moment in time. And if you want to do a story that's about this, you need to address the fact that there is a confidence or trust gap in order to drive your point home in a way that demonstrates that you're more successful than the survey would necessarily show. All right. I want to talk about storytelling with the caveat that storytelling is not going to save you. But storytelling is how we as humans gather around the fire pit and we talk to each other about stuff that matters to us. But I want to talk about the way that storytelling at the end of the academic year sets you up for success in the next academic year and the next academic budget cycle. The storytelling that we have to do, though, is much more argumentative, perhaps, than you've been comfortable with before. And I want to encourage you to do it. Every argument is not necessarily a belligerency. An argument is a studied position about why you and your program. It's a studied perspective about your position in the program. It doesn't have to be angry by any way, shape, or form, but you do have to fight for yourself here in these conversations. There's a lot of conventional wisdom in how we do advocacy in libraries. I'm trying to break that conventional wisdom right now. There's conventional wisdom that says people respond more to stories than stats. That's not true. Deciders, folks who are involved in things like budget committees, elected officials who are responsible for taxing and spending the public tax dollar, and voters and constituents of elected officials, even to a certain extent, donors. People are responsive emotionally, but to the value system that's inherent in how we tax ourselves and how we spend. Is the value system of librarianship, school librarianship in particular, reflected in the budget of your school and your school district? For education aid across your state? Is the value system expressed adequately so that folks who have resonant values about how we should be doing education with a school library program that's open and a school library staffed by a certified school librarian, do they hear your resonant values? And that I said before, stories won't save you, even though we sit around the campfire and tell stories, but the data inside education drives decision making. Everybody's got a story about how they helped a kid. No offense. Everybody's got a story about how they helped a kid, the athletic program, the music program, the theater program, the STEM lab, the speech and debate club, the English class, whether it's remedial, mainstream honors or AP. So does math. Math Olympics has changed kids' lives. Everybody's got a story about kids, and I'm not suggesting you don't tell that story from time to time, but where are the numbers? And you've got a ton of numbers. Where are the numbers that demonstrate change in educational outcomes, in attitudes, in beliefs, in capabilities? Because that's how decisions are made in education. What do you want? This is your storytelling component that becomes more argumentative. Again, a studied position, sorry, a studied perspective on your position in your program. What do you want? And this is up to you. You want more staff or better budgets or a clearer authority to do your job? Do you want more latitude to do your job? Do you want more respect in doing your job? These are up to you. And I want you to put it in your head a little bit as we continue this conversation today, because I want you to win that thing that you want. There are three principles of self-interested advocacy that we're trying to advance here at EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute. This is for individual positions or small groups like school librarians are in districts, or sometimes you're the only one in the school. This is valuable information for public libraries and academic libraries, for state libraries as well. It's fascinating to me that these three principles are not well traveled in our education around advocacy, and I'm looking to put them into your hearts, your heads, and your guts. You folks are the only experts on school libraries and school librarianship in your school, in your district, in your region, together as a group, whether it's a membership organization or a caucus of the profession in the state, in God Bless America, the United States of America. Your expertise about how librarianship should be applied to the challenges of education, how school libraries should be put to work supporting kids and other teachers and the administration and parents and the whole community's future. Your expertise is where you stand on for your advocacy. Likewise, number two, you have to define the negative. What happens if you cannot do the work? What happens if you don't do the work? You're disempowered by the budget. The position is under threat of cuts. What happens if you're not there? And defining the negative is only possible to be done by the expert. What are the negatives we love to talk about the expected and hoped for outcomes, the good things that we're going to do for these kids and these other teachers that we're colleagues with, and for this school community, this learning community. What happens if we can't or don't is not going negative. It's not a rhetorical space. It is a truth telling. And whenever you're asking for new money to improve the situation, you have to define what happens if you don't get it and you can't do the work, because there's a whole group of stakeholders who are suspicious. They're very suspicious about where the money's going and who's spending it. And they hear Pollyanna stories all the time. They get promised constantly about great things that are going to happen. If I hear one more great story about the science of reading or another literacy coach, God help us. I mean, the truth of the matter drives a lot of decision making amongst adults, and you have to be the one to carry that forward. And number three, the three principles of self-interested advocacy: no one's going to solve your budget or policy issues but you. If storytelling worked, we would have already solved all of our problems, because we'd go and tell a story about how great we are or what our hopes are, and then somebody else would decide to re-engineer the budget for your district or your school or the state or America. They haven't done it yet. They never will. It's up to us to make the proposals that are necessary for us to be paid properly and to have the authority to do our jobs the way we want to have them done. The argument. And this, you're going to get the slides. Ria's going to put the slides up when you get the video from today. Those of you who are watching this on an archive, you've got the slides already. Go find them. The argument, and this is your checklist. What is your argument? What is your studied perspective? Why you and us, meaning the other school librarians, why y'all, as they say in certain parts of the country, instead of a reading specialist or a tech teacher or another position, you are, as the expert, have to define that. What is your argument for putting an effective school library's budgetary needs in front of other priorities? If you can't argue for your own future, nobody's going to argue it for you. And they're not going to magically show up and do that. There's no, the agency here is us. Them is us right now. And what does a plan-based budget that creates or sustains an effective school library program look like? Because the plan of service for your district, the plan of service for education in your state has already been established. Perhaps you've been involved in the establishment of it or the review of it. Maybe you've been on the strategic planning committee for your school or your district. Great. But if you, even if you have, it's already established. And what is that plan-based budget that's necessary to fund your position or your positions, your collection that supports the curriculum, and independent student inquiry, and the effectiveness of other teachers, the outcomes that are already imagined and hoped for in that plan of service. All right, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the annual report as a methodology. And we're going to get to this in a little bit in more detail. But I want to drive to, it's the end of the year. You've done a bunch of stuff over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, couple semesters or trimesters are under your belt. The district's priorities have either been realized by your program or they haven't been. And I want to work towards making sure that if you need funding to continue that realization of the district's priorities, or if you need new funding to turn around some failures that are happening, we can get you to that point. What are your district's priorities? And is your library program doing it? Now, this is very different from state to state, and even in some states, it's very different from district to district. But in general, the districts and states have plans. They have plans of service for their students. There's a set of skills that need to be developed, knowledge that they should have as students by graduation, whether it's matriculating from fifth grade to sixth grade or eighth grade to high school or high school to career or college. Those plans have certain competencies, and they may or may not cluster in 5 or 6 different ways. And this is my list here at EveryLibrary. If you don't agree with me, that's cool. Send me an email. My information is going to be available later. If you do agree with me, great. If you don't think there's this many, whatever. Generally speaking, we want to see critical thinkers and problem solvers amongst our students. Our students need to become effective communicators to get through the rest of their life. They have to be collaborators. Group work is something I was not brought up with and I don't care for, but apparently that's what we're doing in education now. Innovation, innovators, people who are independent thinkers, responsible citizens, self-directed learning, these are all baked in at the district level and the state level in 50 places. Do we talk about ourselves in a way that works within those rubrics, within those competencies? We tend to use language in the library around research skills and reading promotion and digital literacy and information evaluation. I got this from a couple of national and state standards. And in fact, we're working on helping to lay down some foundations in a couple states to have state level standards, including a great bill that's advancing in Massachusetts right now to establish state standards. We got a proposal going on in Delaware right now. These are accurate things to say about what the school library program wants to do, but do they match the language of the district plan of service, your school's plan of service? Portrait of a graduate. Hey, Connecticut up on the slide earlier. Connecticut's got this great, robust portrait of a graduate framework. We have to be the ones to map what we do all day on the left and what they want done all year on the right. The research that maps to critical thinking, the media literacy skills that we try and produce to be responsible citizens, perhaps, engagement in reading, project collaboration, the inquiry that we have, the maker spaces, all of these are mappable. We have to not lead with our vocabulary. When we use the vocabulary of the district or of the state, we help the administrators and the boards see what we're doing as being valid, as being appropriate, as being necessary within the instructional life of that school or that district. And it's not simply some services that are being provided. I'm not suggesting that we have to rebench all of our vocabulary all the time, but on one day a year, when you're trying to deliver that annual report, whether it's required or optional, whether it's required, optional, or even something you're going to do in an entrepreneurial fashion because you watch this webinar and you've been part of this conversation with the TLC community, we have to be in a position to be seen. We have to be in a position to be understood. So there's a crosswalk here that I'd like to suggest, and we can unpack this further in other conversations. We're very happy here at EveryLibrary to have these longer conversations with you as you're thinking things through. You got the slides specifically, and like I said, Ria's going to have them up for you, or they're already there if you're watching the archive. How do we talk about ourselves in a way that is understood as being part of the value system of education, the mission that that school or district is on, and the vision that they have for their students, for your students? The plan language that emphasizes inquiry, analysis, and evaluation, we need to be courteous to our listener and to our reader and to our funding partners. That what we do as making connections within this critical thinker and problem solving language is going to be particular and peculiar to your district's plan of service. I'll give you that. But in the main, when students learn how to evaluate sources, which is one thing that you love to do all day as a school librarian, and build evidence-based arguments in the library, which is something that you also love to do as a school librarian, I've seen you at work, the students, are developing critical thinking competencies described in our district's plan of service. And then you go on to talk about yourself. Effective communicators. The plan has frameworks that talk about students becoming better at communicating verbally, in the written word, with data and information. You do all these things. You do so much work to make sure that these kids are ready to roll in media literacy and information literacy frameworks. The projects in your library that give students the opportunity to present research, synthesize ideas, and communicate knowledge to an audience do these wonderful things. And the absence of your work in this space diminishes the school or the district's ability to make effective communicators in the future. Collaborator language in the plan of service, the collective problem solving, the fact that you have a space that is so low barrier to having collaborations happen that everybody sends their kids to you to do the collaborative work because they don't have room in their classrooms. You're it in some places. The project-based learning, the group research and inquiry, the interdisciplinary learning that you support as a school librarian, you have to remind the administrators and the boards and your funding partners and the taxpayers where this is a natural. And you're going to say, John, we already do that. Great. I'm going to give you a thumbs up on the screen. That's fantastic. Let's help other people who don't have that same skill set that you do about communications. But let's also remind them that what happens to this goal, this rubric, this plan of service, if you're not there and the space is shuttered, it's only open a couple hours, that you're getting pulled out to be a substitute teacher and nobody can staff it. We have to remind them what happens if you cannot do the work or don't. Responsible citizenship language is in a lot of states that civic responsibility, ethical participation, digital citizenship, all of the rubrics that you cover, we have to be able to translate that again into the specific plans of service for the taxpayers, the folks on your library or your school board, the administrators, that you are delivering core components. All right. You know where I'm going with this. I don't need to lean into all of them, but I want you to lean into all of them. Download the PDF and use this as a bit of a checklist. How do I find, number one, my own district's plan of service about self-directed learner language? And then how do I take this and map it to whether we've been successful or whether we've been hampered by the current budget? Have we been successful and we want to hold the line? What does it cost to do this work? Nobody but you knows as much as you know. What does it cost to have a collection that supports not only the curriculum, but student learning and independent inquiry? What does it cost to have it properly staffed and a clean, well-lighted place and all the stuff that you've got there to make sure that you're hitting these rubrics, these plans of services? You got to name the numbers. And you've got to be able to say in an articulated fashion whether you've had the right resources and we need to hold the line because stuff's getting tight for education, or you haven't had the right resources and something is going to happen in the world negatively if you can't correct that budget shortfall. Okay, so Ria's going to do us a little favor here, and we're going to put up a poll. Ria, thank you for jumping on again. Before we finish this segment out, I want to find out who in the room's already doing this kind of work. And if you don't mind, Ria, can you put it up?
Yep, let me get that launched right now.
Thank you. I'm going to go off camera while people respond.
All right, so the question for you on your screen is, do you currently create and share an annual report with admin and board stakeholders about your program? A couple of options for you. Yes, you're already doing that. Or possibly you're putting in all of the work to create those reports, but you aren't sharing them or don't know how to create that story. Maybe no, you're not doing that, but you would love to start. You are in the right place to get that going because we will share these resources. Or if this is all news to me, and we've got some answers coming in. We've got about a 60-40 split right now.
Mhm.
60% say yes, they are doing an annual report.
Great.
40% no, but we would like to start. So
Great, great,
no
great.
middle zone. Yeah.
So yeah, what we're going to do, Ria, then is lean in with some best practices for folks who are already doing it, and then maybe some wind beneath the wings for folks who want to start it. And it is pretty presumptuous of us to suggest for somebody who's never done it before that you should, but you should, because the annual report fundamentally is a mechanism for sharing what the value system is for school librarians and school library programs. You have a value system about education, about how you treat kids, about how you transmit all these different rubrics of worth of information. The annual report allows you to tell that story again and to find places where that value system resonates with other stakeholders, whether they're funders, whether they're other educators, whether they're parents. This isn't going to get through to everybody. A lot of parents don't actually, you know this, unfortunately, they're not involved. You're not going to convert hearts. You're not going to wake people up. What I'm looking for is a document that allows you to be, well, so that whole Archimedes principle. If I have a place to stand and a long enough lever, I can move the world. Everybody knows that one. If I have a place to stand, and that's the value system of education that you're expressing in the annual report. If I have a long enough lever, that's money, and you can move the world. Yes. What you nobody ever talks about though with that metaphor is what do you push against? There's a fulcrum. okay, that you push against. And that is the plan of service. If you can't leverage against that, then what you have is a series of talking points uh, um, what's the word I'm looking for here? Nice things to say about libraries and librarianship. Okay, so annual report tips, your best practices here. Framing it in terms of district priorities, not your own priorities. I understand that you have goals. I understand that you have work that you want to do all day. I don't care what it is, pardon me, until it's framed in terms of the district's priorities, because what gets funded is either legitimate priorities that are required or the talking points that the district has about their priorities. Connecting the resources that you have, and I don't mean the collection, I mean the money that you have to do your job directly to student outcomes, has to be articulated by you. We either had the budget or we did not have the budget. We had the staff or we did not. We had the collections, or the collections were as old as the parents. And positioning the school library as infrastructure for student success, because you are. You're part of the built environment. You are part of the built environment, and that's infrastructure. You have a position or two or three, I hope, on the org chart in your district. You've got the assets, the durable goods, the books, or the database access. What are the impacts for all students across these? What are the impacts for specific populations as well? And talking about all students is very important because most students are not in a particular track. Most students are not in need of an IEP. Most students, unless you're in a place where most students are, I mean, if you're in a Title I school, most students are a percentage of poverty. Talking about most students does not negate, erase, or otherwise hide students from specific populations. You have to lean in on that conversation too, but don't forget the most student rubric will actually that we don't tend to talk about that enough, and it's a professional observation on my part to bring it up. Reflection first. What competencies appear in your district's plan? I just went through a bunch of conceptual ones, sort of the broad strokes of it. What's your particular plan? Which school library programs, and I maybe have that awkwardly phrased, what do you do all day for a living that supports those competencies? Again, this is reflection before you start writing. How could you describe those programs using the district's language rather than library language? And I don't need a crosswalk between the AASL standards and the ISTE standards here. I don't need a crosswalk. Just what are you doing all day that lines up? And can you identify one example in each plan, each of those competencies, plan domains that you can use to support your argument that your job, your collection, your staffing, your clean, well-lighted space is more important than something else. And again, without the argument, you're issuing a report. We're trying to put together a bit of a polemic here with the annual report. The opening discussion, if we don't want to use the word argument, let's develop that a little bit. And then also, folks, if we haven't been doing the Q&A box, Rhea is going to be kind enough to read out your questions, but not just questions. Comments are awesome. Observations, correctives. You can yell at me if you want. This is when I appreciate, Rhea, that we don't have a microphone necessarily, but I might be wrong here, and I want to hear from folks because we need to get this right if we want to not only preserve our own jobs, here today, but the future of the profession in general. Storytelling only works if you understand the way that the story needs to land. This is data, this is anecdotes, this is anecdata, this is exemplars of the competencies that you have. It's the plan A, what happens if we get the money and we can do the work. It's the plan B storytelling of what happens if we don't do the work because we can't do it because we've been disempowered by the budget or disempowered by the policy frameworks. Stories of success emphasize the value system, not the ROI. What are we trying to do for kids? What are the competencies in the plan? What are the plan deliverables? Stories of failure are very important to tell. They're very important to tell if they're true stories. I'm not asking you to run around saying the sky is falling if it's not, but stories of failure demonstrate the integrity of the storyteller. Between your value system, your integrity, and your competencies, that type of storytelling drives budgetary decisions. Is our value system as a community reflected in the budget? Do we have competent people doing the work who have the integrity to name when something is happening? Stories about other people who are important to you are great stories to tell, but they're third tier stories compared to value system and integrity. And stories about why you do what you do in that annual report, what's your motivation, are only appropriate to tell if they connect the dots between you as a school librarian who's an educator and other educators who might teach English or history or math. They might be other educators who run the school library, I'm sorry, the school theater program, the sports program. Folks, this why do you do what you do is not told the right way because oftentimes because we have to make connections with other educators because you tend to be solo practitioners. There's a bunch of people in the history department. There's a bunch of people in the athletics department, that's for sure. Where your connection points is what's your motivation. Because your identity, let me just harp on this for one more second. Your identity as a school librarian is unique. Your identity as an educator is not. The argument, are we extending success or are we fixing failure this season, this semester, this year? Are we forecasting that we're extending our success? We've been a great school library program. We've been nailing it. Or are we here to fix failure in the school or for our students or their families? Labeling this accurately means that you can make an argument for fundability. The argument for your position instead of a reading specialist or tech teacher or another position, I mentioned this earlier, an argument for putting an effective school library's budgetary needs in front of another school or district has to be baked into your storytelling. And yeah, it's a little bit of a brag book. And yes, it might need to be sensitively written, but to be able to prove the positive and prove the negative means that you can bring it back to that plan-based budget. There's a small amount of smart taxpayer money, a small amount of smart student fees and tuition money that gets put to work. What is that budget supposed to look like? So, the annual report fundamentally, and Rhea, we're coming around to just a few more moments. If folks have something to put into the Q&A box, this is the time for them to do it. And then I appreciate you helping support by reading them out loud for me. The annual report is not about proving that you were doing activities. Yes, you did a tremendous amount of work. You're going to have a couple months maybe off, but I doubt it. Most school librarians go back in. They stay late and they come back in early from summer break because you got a lot of stuff to clean up. I know this. You're not going to get any credit for that except in heaven, but it's about demonstrating that the school library is an essential infrastructure for student success. That's the rubric that we use with annual reports. This list is a Platonic ideal. It's in the cave. Okay, there's a projection here in my head about what it should look like. If you have a form that you have to follow, that's great. But if you have the opportunity to produce your own annual report or make an addendum to it, make an extension for it, place it on the website, place it in the newsletter, place it in front of the board members after it's placed in front of the administration, it's placed in different ways in front of the news and in social media. Having it with this kind of a structure is proven, but it's not required. It needs to have these elements, though, in the narrative as best you can. Real quick, what do we do? Executive summary, and then connections to the district plan and student competencies, the highlights of your program tied to student outcomes, and a sharing of data that you interpret. Data by itself is data unless there's something attached to it that predates your proffer of data on the part of the reader. Is this a good collection circulation? Is this a bad one? Have the number of lessons that we've been able to do good or bad? I'm being really Manichean here because as a parent, as a taxpayer, as a board member, even as your administration, the number of people who come through your door, the number of kids who come through your door, the number of ways that you collaborate with other teachers, the way the technology is utilized, if you don't provide context for your data points, they're going to make decisions based on something other than your program. They're going to make decisions based on other parts of the school community or they're not going to use it for decision making at all. It's going to be information that's white noise. What are the budget needs that are connected to the goals of the program? And then you could finally get to fun stories. I'll let you have some fun. I have the word fun here, Ria, in the slides. It's unusual for me. And then forecasting. The priorities that you are identifying that are either about success extension or failure fixing. The priorities that you're identifying, forward looking about are we able to implement our district's or our state's plan of service? Are we properly resourced? You've got to look ahead for people and define what that looks like. It's not just hope, it's the warning that if we don't have the right resources in place, there will be shortfalls. Sharing it out, I mentioned before about the website and placing it in front of folks. Again, this is just a little bit of a checklist for you. The advocacy that you're doing cannot stay inside the library, and it can't just be put up on the bulletin board. You need to be perhaps entrepreneurial about how you distribute this. You might even have to be doing a little bit of spycraft because I know in some places you're not allowed to walk down that hall to get close to the superintendent's office because the secretary doesn't want anybody to talk to the superintendent because that's not how we do things in our district. I know that. It's hard. And what are the pathways forward to tell a hero story about the value system for education that was realized by the school library program? Um, the annual report as a function of leadership on your part, the peer leadership that goes on as well, the defining the value of the program by you and your community of school librarians means that we can continually help iterate the value of that program around your region, across your district, around your region in the state, and the shaping of the administrative understanding. That's always the biggest thing. I wish somebody could tell my administrator about how great I am. Well, here's your tool. All right, that's where we're at. Rhea, I'm not sure if everybody's been sitting there thinking that I've been telling them just crazy stuff and they've been dropping off, but is there something in the chat that we should be chatting about?
Yeah, so let's
Or in the
give
Q&A,
folks
I
a
mean?
moment to add some more questions. I think they are absorbing a little bit. We do have a few in now.
Yeah.
Folks, we do also have the chat is open, so just John and I can see that. So if you want to share a story, you're welcome to put it in the chat. I'll also be looking at the Q&A panel in just a moment.
Mhm.
But while we're giving you all a chance to fill that out, John, I think this was a great presentation of all of the data that we can pull together to create those stories. And just from my own personal background, I came from public libraries and then switched to the vendor side, and
Mhm.
that mental transition of being in the library and everything's free and we market our services and it speaks for itself because of how great it is to go into that business mindset of being able to talk about the dollars and cents and be able to put the value behind it. There is such a shift that takes place there.
Mhm.
I'll start us off with the questions. You've shared a lot of great tips today for those folks that maybe are still doing that mental shift of, I don't know how to speak about the dollars and cents. I don't know what stats to find. I don't know how to express my value in
Mhm.
a data-driven way.
Mhm.
What would be the very first step to start with? Can you break it down to the
Yeah.
first step?
Sure. So the number that tells the story most quickly to civilians and your board members are potentially civilians. Most board members are not experts in education policy. They ran for school board. They got appointed to the school board because they want to do something nice or good or important for kids. The administration should be experts. Okay. The thing that hits parents who are civilians and other educational stakeholders who may or may not be experts but really care a lot about the structure of education is the per pupil ratios. Okay, the per pupil activities. To use numbers that are like, okay, our budget, including salaries, is X per student, is a great way to drive the conversation forward. Our collections per pupil the age of our collections, the recency of our collections, the genreification of our collections. Those per pupil or pardon me, pure per pupil or per topic are the things that are translatable most readily. But putting salaries into that matrix while breaking out collection budgets and programming budgets and such, there's places where that number is terrifyingly small. And it might even be offensive to your taxpayers and to your parents if they actually saw it broken out. It might be a political hot potato for you to say, we only have a nickel per kid or a dollar or 14 bucks. I don't even know what your numbers are. Okay. But the truth telling here starts a conversation amongst stakeholders and taxpayers that is invaluable.
Yeah, great response. All right, our next question. This came early in when you were talking about the defining the negative. Can you
Mhm.
explain what that means a little bit more? Is this expect the best, prepare for the worst, or is it all doom and gloom?
No, that's
Not all
great.
doom and gloom.
It's not doom and gloom. It's not going negative. It's not black clouding. It's that the presence of a school librarian, the presence of a collection that's tied to the curriculum, a presence of a collection that's tied to student independent inquiry, the presence of resources in a clean, well-lighted place that's open enough hours. There are expected and hoped for outcomes for that. You have a set of hopes. Okay, I'm hoping to do this kind of teaching, this kind of instructional support, this kind of media literacy coaching, this kind of facilitation of independent student learning. I have a whole set of expected and hoped for outcomes based on the presence of these. And Rhea, I'm not going to use this word impolitely, but it's just simply true features. Okay, and therefore, ergo, there has to be a negative. There has to be an expected and hoped for outcome. If it's there, then there's a caution against its absence. What will be diminished? What's going to be missing? And I don't mean the feature itself. The feature could be large print collections for kids who have learning disabilities and need large print. Okay. What if it's not there? And who's the expert that can define what happens or what won't happen? There's either going to be a diminishment, there's going to be a persistence of a problem, there's going to be a new problem introduced, there's going to be challenges that happen. That authenticity of that the authenticity of that information based on your expertise has to come from you because you're the only expert. It doesn't mean you're going negative. You're not saying the sky has fallen, but somebody's got to tell the truth to these taxpayers, these parents, these board members, and this administration, because otherwise they're not going to realize it.
And I think that's the intersection between the stories that you're telling and that emotion that you're trying to evoke, but also using the data to show it.
Mhm.
So, sometimes numbers are scary. Sometimes that impact does have the larger effects. So being able to show both of them hand in hand.
Mhm.
All right, our next question is this only for new funding? How would you approach preventing budget cuts?
Sure. So new funding comes from one of four places. It comes from cuts to other programs. It comes from reallocations of existing funding sources. It comes from the last refuge of the scoundrel, which is grants, or it comes from new taxes. Okay. So new funding is again driven by either extending your success or fixing failure or averting crisis. That's new funding. Existing funding is again in the same sort of way. We are competent and we have the integrity to name it. Okay. We have competencies that are supported by the current funding formula, and we have the integrity to name what will happen negatively if that funding formula shifts. So it's nuanced to a certain extent because new funding has to be named around success, again, extending success, replicating success, or averting crisis or fixing failure. That's new money. Existing money is about continuity of care, and that our care extends to what happens if we can't be there to be that effective school library program delivering by a certified school librarian. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. And if it doesn't make sense to the question asker, put it in the chat and I'll try and clarify.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, last question that I see. This was when you were on the slide that uses the word fun. And by the way, we always have fun here at Webinar Wednesday.
Hmm.
So I know you have listed out all of the data that gets pulled. The question is, what micro data is most valuable to find? So beyond circulation, should I be looking at what parts of the collection circulate by or by which grade? So would you go another level down on some of the data you have on that slide?
That's a great question. And if you're already, um, so what's your what data would support your argument? Is the answer to your question. If you need data to support your argument and you need it down to the third decimal place, great, do it, you know? Don't just round down or just don't just round up. So I can't answer that specifically, but generally, if the data is necessary to support your argument, and again, your argument is a studied perspective on the value of your position and the value of your program and how it should exist, perhaps more than something else in the school. It- Grab the data that you need to support your argument.
All right, just that easy.
Yeah, right. It's so simple. There's a comment in the webinar chat that nobody else can
Mhm.
see that is coming that says, "I really appreciate the frankness of your presentation." And I do want to acknowledge that this is not the normal, like, here's some talking points of how great school librarians are. I already believe all those. I'm stipulating in this presentation that I think you're wonderful people, and you are at a point in the education landscape that helps those particular kids get further into themselves or into their education or into their adulthood. Like you're at a place that I think is really valuable. So I haven't done any talking points or like polemics or whatever, you know? Um, but I want you to win the fight over what is you know, I mean, taxes make Americans crazy. And if we can help moderate that crazy feeling and get to that place where your local school gets an A or a B, because the library it's moving from a B to an A, then I think we've succeeded.
Mhm. We did get another question. Will we be able to receive the recording of your presentation?
Hmm.
Yes. So starting tomorrow, this is going to be up on our website at
Hmm.
tlcdelivers.com/webinars. If you're in this meeting, you will get a reminder via email that that is available, and we are also going to include the PowerPoint as a PDF. John, how can we get in touch with you? We'll jump to that slide first, and I'll circle back to
Yeah, no,
this
so
one.
yeah, tlcdelivers.com/webinars. Here's my contact information. You'll all have it in the slides. I want to hear from you if you want to think things through a little bit more out loud. If there's a group of you in a school district who wants to get together and do this kind of cooperatively as we begin the next academic year, so much the better. Because this is a May presentation that might be catching you up on something that you should be doing. And if I was you, I would do this at the end of 2026, the end of the 25-26 school year. But if you want to get ahead of this for 26-27, give me a shout. Happy to do it. And
And what other ways can every library help our school libraries that are watching this?
I'm
You want to
sorry,
give
can you say
yourselves a
that again?
plug?
I didn't hear you. Say that
Oh,
again?
what other ways can every library help out our school libraries?
You're very kind to ask that. We've got several research papers on our EveryLibrary Institute side that might help you articulate some more of that tie some more of those value system laden conversations into specific student outcomes and the frameworks around education. And then if there's a crisis going on that is focused on the right to read or book challenges, we have our fightforthefirst.org site. And we do a lot of fights inside the K-12 environment around right to read. And then we have our SaveSchoolLibrarians.org site, which is, again, focused on the future of the workforce. If there's unfair cuts happening, we'd like to help you fight against them.
Thank you.
Hmm.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for sitting with us this afternoon and getting some really valuable tips. You're not behind on the process. You can get started now before the end of the semester. Before you head out to summer, like John said, you can go ahead and prepare for next year to get started and think about what you want to be tracking through the year ahead. So thanks for joining us today. We do have a webinar scheduled for June 3rd up on the website on here, tlcdelivers.com/webinars. That's going to be more public library focused of how you can get more card holders through growing libraries. So, John, thank you so much for representing today and bringing every
Absolutely.
library and sharing some really great information. We had a good time.
Always nice to be with you, Ria, and the TLC community. Thanks, team.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great summer.
Cheers.